Well, like most things in life, the homeless involvement for me came about because it was put in front of me. I'm one of those big believers that life is what happens to you while you're busy making plans, that famous old John Lennon expression. I might have been planning to do something else, but the Super Bowl came to Detroit, and while it was there, they announced that they were going to have a party for the homeless, this big party for the homeless. And I didn't understand, how can the homeless have a party? And when I looked into it, what it turned out was they were gathering all the homeless up and putting them into this one big shelter to get them off the street so that they wouldn't bother the customers in Detroit. They called it a party, but it was like, look, don't bother anybody here. Come on in here, we'll lock the doors behind you. And then on Monday morning, when the Super Bowl was over, they booted them back out into the snow. And I thought this was so cruel, just like, oh yeah, we're going to take care of you for 3 days, and then boom, boom, go on your way. That I went and spent a night in a homeless shelter to try to write about the experience, to try to bring some attention to this hypocrisy. And while I was online at this homeless shelter, waiting for food, this one older gentleman turned around and he looked at me and he said, "Aren't you Mitch Albom?" And I said, "Yeah." And he looked me up and down. He said, "So what happened to you?" And at first I kind of chuckled, and then I realized, well, that makes perfect sense. In his world, why not me? I mean, why? I'm just one bad patch away from being homeless, one bad substance abuse problem, got fired from my job, divorced, whatever the case may be. And in his world, it's perfectly normal that I could have fallen and ended up there. And that kind of struck me as, well, there's not that big a difference between this place and my place, even though I thought there was. And I began to go back and began to feel like, I might be able to make some kind of difference there by telling these stories. And while I was there, I observed how pastors and preachers would come regularly to these homeless shelters and talk to the men and women who were there about hope and faith. And they would listen. And I said, if you can have hope and faith in this place and still think that things are going to get better and still think that someone's watching out for you and that God loves you and that Jesus has his eye on you, and man, there's something stronger to this than I've been considering. And that's when I sort of got the idea that would be an interesting book if I was working with somebody who was on this level, where you have every reason in the world to think, like, hey, I've been abandoned, and contrasted it with the suburban life that I had grown up with out in New Jersey, and with an older rabbi who'd never done a thing wrong in his life. I mean, he's a spiritual leader and an exemplary man. And when Pastor Covington came into my life, I thought, well, this is it. This was meant to be. These are two completely different men, and yet they have this spark of faith inside them that makes them think that things are going to be okay, even though the rabbi's facing his death and the pastor is facing the crumbling of his church. They still had this calmness and belief, and I wanted some of that calmness and belief for myself and for my people who would read the book, and that's how the story came about.